Great fight coming up, Matt. At featherweight, we have Billy Quarantillo taking on Kyle the Monster Nelson. Matt, for the Canadian, Kyle Nelson, we expected him to fight Sean Woodson not that long ago, back in June. Visa issues going from Canada to the States posing him a bit of a problem. We did actually see him over on Fight Island cornering teammate Diana Belbizia, so take that for what it's worth. And now coming in here to not Fight Island, but the Apex facility, taking on Billy Quarantillo, who I remember back when we had Adrian Vallecca and Anthony Romero on the show. So Adrian Vallecca, a bit of a backstory on him because I'm going to go there. He's actually one of the coaches with Gary Roberts of the NHL, getting hockey players ready and training them in the offseason. Guys like Connor McDavid, Steven Stamkos. So really interesting background for Vallecca.
I didn't even know that.
And it was a great interview, but it was before he fought Billy Quarantillo with King of the Cage. So Corantillo gets the win there over Vallecca with King of the Cage, beats Kirk over on Contender Series, gets the win there by knockout. Then he comes in, fights Jacob Kilburn. And Matt, you are going to be hard-pressed to find a more lopsided win for a guy than Billy Quarantillo over Jacob Kilburn. And if you look at Quarantillo's stats, because he only had 2 fights in the UFC, they're incredibly skewed by that fight. And I'm going to give you the numbers anyway. So Billy Quarantillo landed 139 of 165 strikes. Jacob Kilburn in that fight landed 6 of 9. So good for you, Jacob. But Quarantillo went in there and absolutely ran train.
And that's a part of his skill set that it doesn't really get talked about much. Billy Quarantillo is more of a grappler than he is a striker, and his striking's really good. I mean, we saw it in the Spike Carlisle fight. Now, Carlisle, you don't really know what you're going to get because he's like the Michel Pereira of 155 or 145, excuse me, because he's going to exert all this energy going for the finish. He'll throw crazy spinning techniques. He'll go for these really high volume takedowns where he just picks you over his head and slams you. Problem is that style doesn't really lend itself to going a hard 15 minutes. And we saw he was able to control Corantillo on the ground for the majority of the fight, but then once the second round started to come, Corantillo, just the power bar, Spike Carlisle went to 0 pretty quick because he was going for all these really high energy techniques. And then Corantillo, just as the fight wore on, we got to see some of that striking. Really nice jab, really good straight right. Can mix it up too with his kicks and isn't afraid to switch stances, but really the key to his wins is that if the fight goes to the ground, he's very good. He's a very good striker, but if you go for the takedown, he can catch a neck. If he gets on top, he's got really good ground and pound. He's a really dynamic fighter. For a guy who, in his last fight, he was kind of the B side. A guy who, he's supposed to lose to Spike Carlisle, who's, supposed to be kind of the next big thing at 145. He played spoiler that night. It was a phenomenal fight, too. And we got to see how good his chin and his cardio is. Because he got hit with some big shots in that fight. And he had to go a hard 15. And he was more than up to that task. And it's odd, too, because this is another one of those cases. We had a few fights like this last weekend where you go, well, he beat that guy. Why is he fighting this guy? And that's kind of the same thing for me with this fight. Not that Spike Carlisle's a world beater by any means, but if you beat Spike Carlisle, I would assume that you're going to fight, maybe a veteran who's no longer in the top 15, maybe a guy who has a bit of fanfare behind him. You're fighting Kyle Nelson, who's a hard out, tough out, really tough guy because he can do a little bit of everything, but I wouldn't say that Kyle Nelson's at the level of some of the guys who Billy Quarantillo
and
beat.
If we really look into it and talk former common opponents, both these guys have finish wins over common worthy that you're going to see in the co-main event of this card, taking on Otman Azaitar. That's a great fight. Make sure you check that one out in the playlist. But both these guys have finishes over Worthy. That doesn't mean too much because that was Worthy drawn out at 45. At 55, he's looked like a different fighter, and I'm not going to spend too much time on Worthy here. But for Kyle Nelson, he had a bit of a total opposite debut. He came in on incredibly short notice against a guy who's looked amazing lately, and Carlos Diego Ferreira. He loses that one somewhat predictably. That was on the Max Holloway fight against Frankie Edgar, and it happened. So then he comes out and he fights Matt Sales. I would have expected Kyle Nelson to beat Matt Sales. He didn't. He got finished in that one. And then in his last time out, he knocked out Polo Reyes, which I would expect a strong gust of wind to knock out Polo Reyes on a good day. So that's kind of what it's worth. Kyle Nelson, boxy striker, really stiff, and that's the thing that I don't like. He's a guy who's 29 years old, 16 pro fights, fighting with BTC at one point. I know fellow Canadian James Lynch covered BTC extensively when he was in Ontario, now a British Columbia boy, now and always I guess, but transplanted to Ontario at that point, so shouts to James. But yeah, I do not see this one for Kyle Nelson. I don't normally tip my hand this early, and maybe he does win. I mean, striking's not terrible, but Billy Quarantillo seems to be better in just about every area.
I couldn't really agree more. Corantillo, if the fight's on the feet, he can keep range better. He's got more power in his strikes. He has a wider variety of strikes that he can throw as well. And then the second the fight hits the mat, not that Kyle Nelson's a bad grappler by any means. It's just Corantillo, we saw it especially in his last fight. Carlisle would be able to stay on top of him and not get submitted, but Corantillo could sweep him. He could get back onto his feet. He was having success no matter what level the fight was taking place at, and I don't see this being any different for him.
Matt, if we look over on Tapology to 498 votes, 92% going Corantillo, 59% by decision, 21% say submission, 14% say knockout. If we look over at the odds, Corantillo opened to -300, and all of a sudden, and you see this every week, somebody tossed a lot of cheddar on Kyle Nelson. That line went from -300 to -200 very quick. Corantillo now sitting at a -245. If you look over at Kyle Nelson, +250 is the open. He's now somewhere around a +195 to a +200. Yeah, sticking with the pick of Billy Quarantillo. Don't see it going the way of the Canadian, which is always a shame. Have to root for the Canadians and put our Maple Leafs on. Matt, I'm going with Corantillo. You're going with Corantillo. We're really looking forward to this card. A lot of under-the-radar fights, including an extended look at our main event between Michelle Waterson and Angela Hill. So you're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. And as we always say, let's get into it.